My name is Jennifer Herdt. I'm professor of Christian ethics and associate dean for academic affairs right here at Yale Divinity School. I'm delighted to welcome you to this session, which turns our attention to environmental ethics. So what are the implications for how we ought to live of telling one cosmological story rather than another? Do we have the conceptual resources at our disposal to articulate our duties with respect to the cosmos, with respect to future generations, with respect to other species, with respect to non-living parts of creation? And does cosmology underdetermine our ethics? And if so, how do we respond to that? These are the kinds of questions that we'll be grappling with in this session with the help of three wonderful speakers, one of whom, unfortunately, is not actually present with us. So Mary Evelyn is not Willis Jenkins. She is standing in for Willis Jenkins, and we're very glad that she's doing that. But first, we will be hearing from Larry Rasmussen. And very briefly, Larry is the Reinhold Niebuhr Professor Emeritus of Social Ethics at Union Theological Seminary, but has escaped to beautiful Santa Fe. Fancy that. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, he is the author most recently of Earth Honoring Faith, Religious Ethics in a New Key, and I can't resist mentioning that it is the grand winner of the 2014 Nautilus Book Award, as well as being one of Amazon editors' favorite books of the year. So we're really delighted to have you.
Well, it's always a joy to be a part of anything that Mary Evelyn and John and Tara and Paul and the staff put on. I mean, we all kind of stand a little taller and are a little lighter afoot at the end of any of these gatherings. And I have to say something about the cuisine, which you mentioned yesterday, Mary Evelyn. If you've been to many of these, you know that it's making us move slowly, gently back into God's original plan, namely a bunch of naked vegetarians dancing in the garden.
That's great.
I was at a conference recently in South Africa, and Alan Bosak took off his wristwatch and laid it on the podium and said, when a black preacher takes off his wristwatch and puts it on the pulpit rail, it doesn't mean a damn thing. Well, I'm not a black preacher, but Jennifer, you'll have to tell me, because it doesn't mean a damn thing. It would be my response.
I'm looking at my watch.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a developing conversation, and so I want to actually get to my paper, which is getting from Protestant social justice to interfaith creation justice, what would it take? By way of some conversation that have happened yesterday and this morning. So I want to start with some comments to water, and especially to the frequent invocation of the sacred these past 2 days, and move from there into the justice and cosmology issues. The narrator in Marilyn Robinson's Gilead is old Pastor John Ames, who writes letters to his young son of his second marriage, to Lila. Now, water and baptism are recurring motifs in these letters, and Ames recalls, for example, how as a pious child, in a pious household, in a fairly pious town, he and his friends baptized a litter of cats. Now, these were little dusty barn cats, and they were all swaddled in a doll's dress, the same doll's dress for all the cats, who had their brows moistened with, Marilyn Robinson says, the full Trinitarian formula. Except that the grim mother kept hauling the kittens off by the napes of their necks until young John the Baptizer and his friends lost track of which were done and which weren't done. We were fairly sure, writes Ames, that some of the creatures had been born away still in the darkness of paganism. And that worried us a great deal. So finally I asked my father, in the most offhand way imaginable, what exactly would happen to a cat if one were to, say, baptize it? He replied that the sacraments must always be treated and regarded with the greatest respect. That wasn't really an answer to my question. We did respect the sacrament, but we thought the whole world of those cats. I got his meaning, though, so I did no more baptizing till I was ordained. Now, the unifying theme in Marilyn Robinson's work is her belief in a sacred world. She tells a New York Times interviewer that being and human beings are invested with a degree of value that we can't honor appropriately, an overabundance that is magical. Overabundance or not, she tries to honor it appropriately. And in passages about water, whether or not the sacrament is to hand. Indeed, passages about baptismal water find sacramental power to be a derivative of water's inherent sacred nature, being's sacred nature. And as it turns out, the atheist theologian Ludwig Feuerbach is a favorite of Pastor Ames, in part because he understands this. Water is the purest, clearest of liquids, writes Feuerbach. In virtue of its natural character, it is the image of the spotless nature of the divine spirit. In short, water has a significance in itself as water. It is on account of its natural quality that it's consecrated and selected as the vehicle of the Holy Spirit. So far, there lies at the foundation of baptism a beautiful, profound natural significance. End of quotation, Feuerbach. Now, excuse me. Water as sacred and therefore sacramental in all instances gives the old pastor eyes to see. A little farther into this same memory, he remembers Feuerbach is also good on the joyful aspects of religion. The two, water and joy, come together as Ames recalls this scene on his way to church. There was a young couple strolling along half a block ahead of me. The sun had come up brilliantly after a heavy rain, and the trees were glistening and very wet. On some impulse, plain exuberance, I suppose, the fellow jumped up and caught hold of a branch, and a storm of luminous water came pouring down on the two of them. And they laughed and they took off running, the girl sweeping water off her hair and her dress as if she were a little bit disgusted, but she wasn't. It was a beautiful thing to see, like something from a myth. I don't know why I thought of that now, except perhaps because it is easy to believe in such moments that water was made primarily for blessing and only secondarily for growing vegetables or doing the wash. I wish I had paid more attention to it. My list of regrets may seem unusual, but who can say that they are, really? This is an interesting planet. It deserves all the attention you can give it. But is it true that water was made primarily for blessing and only secondarily for growing vegetables and doing the wash? Is its nature as sacred more basic than its nature as utility? How can that possibly be? How can that possibly be, especially if this most decisive of all elements is in crisis because of the awful presence of its absence in drought, or because of bad management and harmful maldistribution, or because of poisoned freshwater and souring seas? It cannot be unless you're fond of heresy, or unless you're fond of Marilyn Robinson, or unless you're fond of the Lutheran World Federation, whose themes for 2017, the 2017 500th year commemoration of the Reformation are not for sale, salvation, not for sale, human beings, not for sale, creation. Of course, creation is for sale. Now take this sacred world of Marilyn Robinson to the topic, Protestant social justice to interfaith creation justice. What would that take? That would take a different cosmology with a different basic human relationship to the rest of nature. And I'm going to, in the interest of time, read just a couple of paragraphs from the paper that is now available online, and then just summarize the points of what I think it would take to get from Protestant justice to interfaith creation justice. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. For us, the update is, will the fossil fuel age end because we've left coal, oil, and gas in the ground? Or do we continue burning them? Max Weber feared the latter. He ended The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, published in 1904, with the modern capitalist order pictured as an iron cage we've built and in which we've trapped ourselves. Bound to, and I'm quoting him, the tremendous cosmos of the modern economic order, the lives of all the individuals who are born into this mechanism are determined with irresistible force, end quote. Perhaps this order will so determine those lives until, quote, the last ton of fossilized coal is burned, end quote. 1904 was 110 years ago. A century later, and on the very same March day that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its fifth assessment report, strengthening yet again scientific consensus about human-caused warming, ExxonMobil, the most successful business in the history of money, issued a statement saying that it sees no end to the burning of oil and gas. Incidentally, at a shareholders meeting of ExxonMobil, CEO Rex Tillerson responded to those pointing out the need to stop using the atmosphere as a sewer by asking, what good is it to save the planet if humanity suffers? Now, that's the cosmology and ethic of industrialized humans of privilege. That is what we are up against. And it calls for both what Jim Antle yesterday said. Civil disobedience as normative for Christian discipleship and the divestment reinvestment campaign. Can it in turn call upon Protestant social justice? In one sense, that social justice has never been more urgent because climate change hurts those most who have contributed least to it. But my paper argues that the Protestant social justice has been captured by the same economic cosmos in the fossil fuel interlude. That is bringing about the destruction of the planet. And what we have done in this heritage is seek to distribute more fairly the benefits, that enormous benefits that have come from having compact stored energy in the form of fossil fuels. So it's been a distributive justice emphasis, and that will continue to be important. But it's a cosmology which doesn't work because it's the cosmology of industrialized humanity, whether that social justice tradition was socialism or capitalism. It was both industrial socialism and industrial capitalism, and it was tone deaf to the rest of the natural world beyond human society. So that legacy, and ecofeminism and ecowomanisms are exceptions to this kind of critique, but that legacy was a legacy which didn't have the cosmology by which to see what was happening to soil or to water. Disappearing species don't come up on that screen. Altered gene pools, collapsing fisheries, souring seas, environment-related disease, receding forests, melting glaciers, environmental refugees, either much. Biodiversity loss, changes in coastal zone structure, lost wetlands, bleaching coral reefs, more greenhouse gases, surface temperature climbs, more intense storms and flooding, deeper drought, climate instability, mark of the Anthropocene, don't appear in this stream of justice. So the kinds of footprints that are most important now in the Anthropocene don't have a place. And I guess we need to quit here shortly, but the carbon footprint, the water footprint, the biodiversity footprint, the ecological footprint, meaning land and energy footprints, and the material footprint, meaning the measure of resources used, those don't automatically show up as red flags. Because it's a justice tradition that is focused on distributing the benefits of industrial socialism and capitalism more fairly. Okay, what would it take, finish this up, to get to creation justice from social justice? It will take the moral fuel of social justice, and the participants in creation justice are usually people who have been on fire for social justice. So you don't hear any criticism from me for what that has been accomplished there or for the motivation, but it takes a different cosmology. And most all of the 4 points that I have to make about the different cosmology find their source in Thomas Berry. So in keeping with the ancient Christian understanding of oikos, ecology, economics, and ecumenics need to merge as economics. Economics then embeds all economic activity within the ecological limits of nature's economy and pursues this three-part agenda of production, relatively equitable distribution, and ecological regenerativity. This is really turning everything around in the manner of Thomas Berry. The first law of economics must be the preservation of the earth economy. Now the second change, big policy change, is the planet's energy system as the subject of creation justice. I mean, as we know, greenhouse gases act exactly like a blanket. They don't produce the heat, the sun produces the heat, but they trap it and they hold it in a finely tuned system that has been conducive to the triumph of life. Even a few degrees difference can greatly affect how the ocean, the atmosphere, the community of life process that energy. And what has happened in the Anthropocene is that we are markedly changing the planetary surface processes in all of the planetary commons. But our debate about energy is largely misplaced. Almost all justice attention to energy is about energy resources and use. Do we have enough to do what we want and need? Continue to grow the economy to meet human needs? Are we energy independent? And if not, where will we go to secure energy independence? How will energy be distributed fairly. These discussions go on without first asking what energy sources and uses are mandated by the planet's climate energy system. They assume that human energy use is primary and we'll deal with environmental effects thereafter. So should drill, baby, drill mean spill, baby, spill, we'll clean up. This is exactly backwards. The first law of energy is preservation of the planet's climate energy system as conducive to life. Human energy use is derivative of the planet's. This is the parallel to Thomas's maximum that the first law of the human economy is a preservation of nature's economy. So the last item that I want to include, I'll skip over a couple, is just to say we also need an upgraded anthropology, understanding of ourselves, not the shrunken one of industrial humanity, but the one in which we are at home in the cosmos, and the cosmos is at home in us. A gut feel for the cosmos. So these elements, when you compost them together, with deep changes in economic and energy policy, God talk also worthy of the uncontained God, a fearfully and wonderfully made understanding of ourselves. In that, I think the tremendous economic cosmos of the last ton of fossilized coal, Weber, has more than met its match, the wonder of the real cosmos and its economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. These papers will be available online. They'll be published. They're being filmed. So we're just going to keep on summarizing some really big ideas here so that hopefully you'll be able to interact. But I want to give special thanks to Jennifer Herdt, who's been such a great dean here and supportive of this program at Yale, and also to my colleague Fred Simmons, who's just been a wonderful dialogue partner. And I am inventing myself as Willis Jenkins, who was a great dialogue partner as well, and Larry has been a long-time colleague in this work. So Willis's paper was so fruitful that we felt we wanted to include it. I'm going to kind of summarize and read through some of the main points. Journey of the Universe puts in cosmic perspective the remarkable emergence of human creativity, and in our own pinprick of time, the emergence of human influence over Earth. Can the cosmic perspective help humans exercise their influence responsibly? This essay poses that question in regard to the geoengineering projects proposed to help humans cope with climate change. Like many readers and reviewers of Journey, made me pause and wonder at the movements and expanses of the universe. Wonder at the deep sources and improbable emergence of life always deepens my affection for the thin green pulse of Earth's biosphere. There seems to me some connection between wondering at the stars and loving the Earth, between opening ourselves to the question of our place in the universe and deepening our sense of place on Earth. Then he goes on to suggest that more than half of humanity now lives beneath the orange gaze of urban lights, and many of the rest of us orbit around artificial lights at night. The stars nonetheless remain for those who still seek the darkness, but it is easier than ever to ignore them. For many people, then, the universe described by astrophysicists seems impossibly alien from the experience of daily life unfolding in our orbits of artificial life. No longer looking into the dark night sky, we lack the experience of being questioned by the stars and of wondering at great spinning worlds not our own. Meanwhile, the orienting traditions of human meaning, whose stories were surely composed and told beneath the questioning stars, seem to have lost their connection to the universe. The science of astrophysics seems to confound the meaning-making capacities of humanity's great creation stories and orienting myths. The result so far has been that traditions go on telling the old stories in uneasy dissonance with the reports of science, with the consequence that our greatest stories of human meaning disorient us from the universe. Journey helps to heal that narrative disorientation by rendering evolutionary dynamics of the universe within an unfolding story. Journey restores the stars to a species, ourselves, that evolved capacities of meaning-making. Those now figure in the future evolution of the species. If evolutionary cosmology will have any part in human self-understanding, it must be made part of the stories by which humans interpret themselves. Now, the heart of his paper is the case of geoengineering and the relationship to evolutionary cosmology. Climate change is the greatest ecological problem of our time, and the question of geoengineering will be a major determinant in the shape of appropriate human responsibility for Earth. The range of geoengineering proposals varies from irreversible large-scale interventions to reducing the incoming solar radiation to networks of small-scale carbon sequestration projects. This is the frontier, geoengineering. Each is controversial for a different set of reasons, but all are subject to a base objection that planetary engineering responds to a problem of environmental degradation by intensifying rather than withdrawing the human influence. Detractors think geoengineering proposals are symptomatic of humans who refuse to learn the lessons of limit and seek instead to extend human domination. Proponents argue that the recognition of humanity's accidental and negative influence should be replaced by responsibility in the form of intentional interventions for positive outcomes. So, can evolutionary cosmology shed light on the question, should humans undertake intentional alteration of Earth's atmospheric systems? Evolutionary cosmology can help put the geoengineering question in context, but then that context seems to overwhelm the question. It is a truism that everything that exists is a product of the processes preceding it. How does appreciation of those processes inform the exercise of power? His argument is that cosmology has little normative purchase for practical ethics, and Willis is a pragmatic ethicist to the core, and a very fine one. Of course, then, he is saying Journey does not present itself as a practical ethics. My point here is simply to caution the enthusiasm of its many fans. Evolution underdetermines ethics. Obviously, the process by which everything came to be made up the conditional possibilities for any science of human freedom. But wonder at those processes does not go very far in helping humans decide how to act. Journey offers a narrative that, by depicting the emergence of consciousness and its significance for the future of Earth, brings readers up to the cusp of ethics on which the rest of the story now depends. I think this is one of the points Fred makes very well, too. So the case of geoengineering is a good example. One might make the case that attempting to manipulate the planet's atmosphere represents hubris and vain grasping for control, and would therefore be an unfitting participation in the story of the universe. On the other hand, one could make the case that geoengineering represents the Earth self-consciously directing its own future through the planned interventions of one of its species. Both are plausible implications of the narrative. Neither is required nor ruled out. Evolutionary cosmology underdetermines climate ethics. I would say Thomas Berry, though, would be not in favor of geoengineering. But these are extremely important questions. What Willis does, though, is come back to this question, is Journey of the Universe a basis for natural law? And he wants to rule that out, but I think it's something that we could discuss as well. But where he comes back to reinserting Journey into the discussion is wonder as a moral mood. He says, despite my cautionary worries, he said, let me return to the moral significance of telling stories in the wonders at the stars. The stars do not demand any particular way of making meaning from them. Astrophysicists do not require any particular existential mood, but telling stories and using interpretive symbols to set moods seems innate to our species. And the interpretive dispositions to reality sustained by those stories and cultivated by those moods may have pervasive ethical implications. The dispositions and moods set the context for what will count as acting well or poorly. So, let me move to his conclusions. He brings in Robert Bellah and his very brilliant book on religion and the role of religion as play and symbol making. And he suggests that Willis suggests that evolutionary cosmology matters for ethics when wonder at its origins animates forms of cultural play that suspend belief in the competitions that ordinarily order human life. And he uses examples of Buddhism and interdependence. So he's suggesting the narrative, symbol-making capacities, the openness to play and metaphor may be very helpful. So he concludes, while Journey restores the stars to our imagination, he says, receive that way as a restoration of the universe to the imagination of species, Journey does indeed matter for ecological ethics. Received within a mode of symbolic play, evolutionary cosmology can open critical and reparative possibilities for the stories humanity lives by. In play, others might ask, what story would Earth tell of its latent upstart species? What story could the universe tell? And so on. And he says the interpretations are good and true ones just insofar as they are used to sustain fitting, even graceful ways of inhabiting the universe. This is a very brilliant paper, and I think it leads very well to Fred's. Thank you.
Thanks so much to both Larry and to Mary Evelyn for so beautifully summarizing the argument in Willis's paper and picking out just the perfect nuggets. We now turn to Fred Simmons. Fred is assistant professor of Christian ethics here at Yale Divinity School and is a colleague from whom I have learned such a great deal and continue to learn. So I'm delighted to introduce him to you today.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by echoing the thanks that have now become customary, but so heartfelt to John, to Mary Evelyn, for the invitation to participate, and also for the delightful and stimulating conversations that I think we've all shared this weekend. My paper is entitled The Nature and Limits of Contemporary Evolutionary Cosmology's Ethical Significance. And I'd like to begin by referencing an late 17th, early 18th century, 18th and 19th century German thinker Immanuel Kant, who famously said that two things bring admiration and awe to the mind. One are the starry heavens above, and the other is the moral law within. And I think Journey evocatively attests to the admiration and awe that we all feel when we think about the starry heavens above. Moreover, Journey invites us to think about what relation there might be between the starry heavens above and the moral law within. I'd like to suggest that Journey gets that interplay about right, inasmuch as there's a recognition that cosmology can help advance ethical aspiration, but does not itself deliver a determinate ethic. I'd like to explore that by thinking about the relationship between Journey and Christianity, and in so doing, I hope vindicate one of the principal contributions of the Religion and Ecology movement, of which this conference is something of an instance, inasmuch as it's trying to help us explore the relationship between Journey and a particular form of religion, namely Christianity. So first let me say something about the relationship between Journey and Christian theology more broadly that I think will illustrate the kind of relationship that I perceive between Journey and Christian ethics in particular. So Journey attests to not only the connections, but I think the congruence between life on earth and the rest of material reality. For example, Journey observes that, like organisms, matter itself is a self-organizing process, that it ignites creativity in new forms wherever possible, and that it ultimately gives rise to astonishing complexity. At the same time, Journey discerns a deep ambiguity threaded throughout the universe, for destruction is inextricably entwined with the processes of bringing forth ever more complexity, whether that's at the galactic scale in supernova, or here on Earth through evolution by natural selection or the self-consumptive character of ecosystems. Either way, such congruence between life on Earth and the rest of material reality suggests that attention to inorganic phenomena can offer insight into the organic, that nature displays realities evident in culture, and that matter discloses truths about the spirit. If so, then in addition to orienting religious energies to address ever more pressing environmental challenges, cosmology may conduce to religious knowledge. Of course, Journey does not present itself as natural theology, and I think it's right to refrain. Even assuming Christian convictions, Journey's theological import is contestable. For although Christianity explicitly concerns theology, Christians have disagreed about whether, and if so, to what extent, God may be known through nature apart from special revelation. Moreover, Christians who accept natural theology have generally understood it to corroborate and perhaps enrich what they've learned of God and faith by other means, rather than constitute a self-sufficient source of religious wisdom. Thus, while reality per se may prove revelatory given Christian convictions, Christians usually insist that the book of nature remains incomplete and indeterminate without the book of Scripture. And I'll argue momentarily that the same is true for Journey with respect to ethics. Nevertheless, I believe the relatively new story that Journey tells ought to matter to Christian thought, for cosmology doesn't simply affect Christian convictions, but it's a dimension of Christianity itself. Journey foregrounds some of the deep parallels between fundamental Christian beliefs and the material world, and I'll briefly mention two by way of illustration. First, Journey contends that astronomy, geology, biology all discern dynamism as inherent to matter and life, and therefore disclose that material reality is not incidentally but essentially historical. Given their doctrine of incarnation and its interpretation of God's fullest self-disclosure as an event, Christians likewise maintain that truth is not simply propositional or expressible in creeds, but is finally historical. Second, Journey describes the sun as transforming its essence into the energy on which earthly life depends. Such self-consumptive self-giving that sustains others is reminiscent of the Johannine interpretation of Christian discipleship, rooted in the crucifixion of Jesus, wherein the faithful are known by loving as Jesus loved, namely by laying down his life for others. So Christians, I think, have reasons to interpret the deep patterning of life on earth and in the universe as a whole to manifest fundamental spiritual truths about the significance of temporality and the role of self-giving in sustaining life. Likewise, Journey may offer Christians unexpected resources for theodicy. Modern natural sciences intensify the challenge that natural disasters pose for Christian attempts to reconcile God's goodness, wisdom, and power with the world in which we live, since these sciences make it less plausible to suppose that such disasters are ultimately due to human sin. For example, the destructive consequences of tectonic systems have caused grave suffering on a mass scale and led many to question Christian faith. However, Journey observes that the tectonic system has also produced new minerals and polymers that are found nowhere else in the solar system. It's also contributed decisively to the formation of the atmosphere that allowed life to emerge on the planet. Hence, rather than simply random or otherwise uselessly ruinous, tectonic forces appear integral to making Earth fit for organisms. Yet just as Journey is not natural theology, it is not theodicy and does not purport to be. Journey does not claim that the tectonic system's contribution to life on Earth outweighs its harms, or attempt to explain why the God of Abrahamic faiths would rely upon that system to create the conditions for human flourishing. Journey doesn't proffer such justifications, nor should it, for Journey aims to tell the what and how of the universe in order to prompt us to ponder the why. Christians and others who seek to answer that latter question, however, may rightly draw upon Journey and the rest of our knowledge of the world as they attempt to do so. I believe Journey has similar significance for Christian ethics, namely that it directly proves relevant to Christian ethical thought, but is insufficient to deliver determinate moral mandates on its own. Normative ethical theories, whether Christian or otherwise, combine doctrines of value and obligation to organize and justify commitments concerning the substantive content of morality. With its elegant narrative of this vast, dynamic, complex, creative, and finely tuned universe, and the astonishing intricacy, variety, and capacity of the life it has come to support, Journey fosters wonder and appreciation for all that is. As such, Journey inculcates a sense that material reality and the processes that have brought it into existence are valuable. This is a major contribution to ethical reflection. However, the sweeping sense of the value of what has emerged and the way that it has developed does not pretend to provide a definition of goodness, much less attempt to specify the relative value of the multiple good things that have come to be. So in short, Journey does not fashion or imply a theory of the good. Moreover, since ethics concern the right as well as the good, normative commitments are necessary in order for Journey to mean something ethically and not just evaluatively. Nevertheless, as a story of the universe's development and diversification, as revealed by contemporary natural science, Journey properly offers only occasional and vague normative principles. Accordingly, Journey per se lacks the resources needed to furnish determinate moral direction, let alone a theory of the right. So as a result, in itself, Journey does not supply much of an ethic. Yet Journey remains ethically significant, even if it cannot properly issue an ethic on its own, since Journey can have determinate moral meaning when coupled with normative commitments and sensibilities drawn from other realms. For many people, religion is a primary source of such commitments and sensibilities, and hence religion naturally complements Journey. Thus, just as a robust Christian natural theology requires the book of Scripture as well as the book of nature, so I'd like to suggest Journey requires religions or other normative traditions to supplement its cosmological story in order to offer a robust ethical mandate. The field of religion and ecology recognizes and addresses precisely this need. Emerging from concern for the growing environmental crisis, the field of religion and ecology appreciates that cosmology and even ecology do not themselves supply moral counsel or engender moral motivation, but may prove powerful progenitors of both when united with religious convictions. This point came up in yesterday's conversation, and Larry's own remarks and books reflect this point as well. That is that religion and ecology essentially embraces Walter Rauschenbusch's conviction that a robust faith is required to meet the great social challenge of our time. And as such, the religion and ecology movement proves a contemporary ecumenical manifestation of the social gospel. At the same time, religious traditions themselves require ecology and other contemporary natural sciences to realize their potential contributions to the environmental movement, since these sciences help us recognize the nature of our environmental problems and some of the ways we might address them. Moreover, the field of religion and ecology has decisively advanced previous study of the relationship between religion and science that sought to explore the compatibility of these domains at this generic level, as if there were such a thing as religion, and that the differences between the sciences did not make a difference for the relationship to religion. Instead, from its inception, the field of religion and ecology has investigated the connections between specific religious communities and a particular natural science. So what does journey mean ethically given a particular religious tradition and a specific science? Even here, I think that one needs to be circumspect, in part because ethics is such an immense subject, and further because Christianity is so diverse. So for now, I'll simply suggest that Journey offers a compelling way for Christians to appreciate the world they are committed to valuing, and helps them to recognize that the processes that produce and sustain the world that they value ineluctably involve this value for all organisms, including human beings. To be sure, these are very broad principles. Religious traditions offer a matrix of normative commitments that allow Journey to have moral meaning that it lacks on its own. But given Christianity's ethical variety, it would be necessary to examine particular branches of the faith and the more specific ethical commitments that they generate to narrow these principles even with Journey's insights. Cosmology can inform and enrich ethical reflection, and since Christian faith involves cosmological claims, Christians ought allow Journey to inform and enrich theirs. At the same time, cosmology underdetermines ethics, even for Christians and members of other religious traditions, since these faiths have multiple ethical meanings and thus interpret the moral significance of a given cosmology differently. Yet although Christianity and Journey per se do not collectively yield a discrete environmental ethic, they concur about the propriety and importance of relating to the environment ethically. Environmental ethics surely involve much more than this. Nonetheless, consistently relating to the environment ethically would be a significant shift in itself and constitute another step in the universe's journey on planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Before we open up for questions from all of you, I just would like to give the speakers an opportunity to engage with one another. So we've heard from Larry Rasmussen that one of the crucial things that's needed in order for Protestant social justice to become creation justice is a new cosmology. And Willis and Fred, in their different ways, have both argued that in the sense, cosmology underdetermines ethics. That the book of nature, as Fred puts it, is indeterminate and incomplete on its own. That more is needed in particular to arrive at a definition of goodness, an account of relative value, and determinate action guidance. And Willis has made the same point in a more concrete way, asking, how can cosmology alone tell us whether geoengineering is acceptable, and if so, in what form, given all of the potential forms it could take? So let me just invite Larry first to respond to what Willis and Fred have argued.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Fred, and thanks to Willis as well. I think I have You are answering.
I know.
I think I have a friendly amendment or a friendly disagreement. I'm not quite as confident as either Willis or Fred that cosmology underdetermines ethics in the same way that they present. First of all, both of them, in my judgment, do leave space for an important dimension of all moral systems that is really crucial to any ethic, and that is virtue, or what Anne-Marie talked about yesterday as habitus, moral formation. And both of them talk about wonder, etc., but I don't think we've taken that very far. It was interesting listening to Gus Speth last night talk about awe. And there are a number of virtues. Humility. Well, humility for especially the privileged among us, but humility also for the species, Homo sapiens sapiens, has something to say to geoengineering, which can easily be a continuation of the industrial paradigm, and ourselves as subjects and everything else as objects, and only human beings as sacred and not creation as sacred. So I want to go with Willis and with Fred further in talking about what the environmental virtues are that are really the more direct outcome of this cosmology. It isn't all indirect. It's pretty direct, I think. Now, whether you can get principles out of this is the question where I think we maybe disagree. And one reason I cited both economic policy and energy policy was to say that I think you see in this cosmology first principles of economic policy, namely preservation of Earth's or planetary economy, because planetary well-being is primary and human well-being is always derivative. Same way with energy. You could continue on down the line and talk about the principles for an ethic of biodiversity and the necessity of that principle being the preservation of biodiversity, because that's a repertoire that nature uses to meet the challenge of convulsive change. So I'm not agreeing. Maybe I'm not interpreting you correctly, Fred. But I think there are some pretty essential specific principles that are derived from this cosmology, as well as virtues. Now, the last thing I will say is that I wholly agree with both Fred and Willis that the particularity of what to do right now at this time and place, the great work now in this situation, that is the important thing about any ethic that won't be determined either by simply the virtues or the principles. I mean, you get down to that specificity that has to be worked out in the time and the place as appropriate to the time and the place. So we don't have a disagreement there. If you mean by that a determinate ethic, no, we won't get to that level. Okay.
Fred?
Thank you. So Larry implicitly distinguished between a prevailing form of normative ethics, which is going to concentrate on theories of the good, theories of the right, and then an emerging response to that kind of concentration in virtue. And I think that that's a deft way of thinking about, if you like, a relationship between a standard modern way of thinking about ethics and a pre-modern and perhaps also postmodern response to that. I would concur that something like cosmology and narratives more generally are going to be essential to forming virtues. But one of the things that is also endemic to the narrative character of virtue formation is its malleability and specificity. Humility in one tradition is not what humility will mean in another tradition. Courage in one tradition is not what courage will mean in another tradition. And so I think Larry and I are, as I take it, in a great degree of agreement. Where we're diverging is about when we're thinking about environmental ethics, are we thinking at the broad abstract level or are we thinking at the more concrete practical level? I think that there would be a lot of cross-cultural agreement about the value of humility. But what in different cultural contexts humility in fact looks like, there is where divergences will emerge depending on the details of the narratives in which we understand the nature of humility. Willis and I are suggesting that a story as grand and cosmological as Journey provides a great ultimate context, but that the virtues themselves to address the kind of concrete problems that we face when we think about environmental ethics require still further specificity. And their particular traditions that can be consonant with Journey can provide some of that specificity. So Christianity, other world religions, non-religious normative traditions can be enriched by Journey, but then their own normative commitments themselves enrich the Journey narrative and together provide a more determinate understanding of these virtues.
That was a really rich interchange. We are now going to take, we started late, so I think we're allowed to go over a little bit into our coffee break. We will invite questions from the floor.
I want to say something.
Oh, well, first, as you're gathering and standing up to give your questions, we're going to have Willis. No, or maybe actually this is probably Mary Evelyn and not Willis.
Sorry. So this was a difficult act to do. because I kind of disagree with the paper, all right? In case you didn't notice. But I think the questions that are raised here on both sides are essential. This would be a whole conference in itself, and it's why we are so happy to be in dialogue with, serious ethical thinkers. But I do want to say, cosmology has been absolutely essential to every religious tradition. It's why we're trying to escape a Genesis cosmology, right, that has had dominion. But a medieval cosmology, we are in a new period of cosmology. The cosmologies of Confucianism and Taoism are naturalistic and do determine ways in which people value the world, etc. So I think the context of cosmology is essential, the practical implications of it. Differentiation, subjectivity, and communion are the principles that Barry put forward as cosmological ethics. Heather. Yeah. Good.
My question actually continues this same line of thinking of what kinds of ethics can be derived from, let's say, cosmology, or what ethics can be derived from Journey, A Story of the Universe. And I would say that I know Willis's work quite well, and he has a pragmatic concern. So I would differentiate your paper, Dr. Simmons, from Willis, because his concern is quite specific. And it seemed to me you emphasize a discontinuity in ethical thinking. And in my view, I think that, so I'll try to keep it really short. I do think that the Journey of the Universe has a lot more ethical orientation in it than you are saying. I think it has a great deal to say about biocide, geocide. It has a great deal to say about animals, how we treat animals. So it's not a pragmatic agenda, but it's not just shaping the moral imagination, virtues, and values. It has a great deal more to say about life flourishing. What are the conditions of life flourishing? So many of us here have worked on Journey and patriarchy. Now that takes a little bit of gymnastics to get that, but I would still say you underestimate what Journey offers.
Let's take two more questions before we turn to answers.
Okay. Well, this is just to add further complexity to the cosmology question. Speaking as a biblical scholar, I think already in the Bible we see represented dueling cosmologies, and I'm just saying I don't think what we need to overturn is the Genesis cosmology. I think rather that Genesis and biblical texts were framed in the context of empires and their cosmologies. The Babylonian Empire had a cosmology that said humans are to be crushed and used as slaves. In the Roman Empire times, they had a cosmology of eternal Rome that included slavery, and over against that, biblical authors drew on the ancient liberating cosmology of the Hebrew tradition. So I guess my question is it just the old story versus the new story, or can we see that there's multiple sort of dueling cosmologies through history that we need to draw on the submerged, sometimes voices of the liberating strand in every time, and that's certainly what we try to do as liberation biblical scholars now. So cosmologies may be more numerous than we're allowing.
One more back in the back, yes.
My comment will be brief. I'll speak it as an activist. So I see a straight line from cosmology through wonder, as Gus spoke of it last evening, into urgency. And I'd love to hear your comments, if that's possible. How does urgency enter into how each of you have framed this conversation?
This woman has been patient. I know she'll move with you.
I'm wondering if we can connect the Journey of the Universe with the Earth Charter. And here we are, many religious in a divinity school. Where's the particularity of the urgency that we can speak in the public and offer religious voices to public discourse where it doesn't seem to be moving? Where are the religious voices for forming us and leading us to be ethical people?
Thank you. Fred, why don't you go ahead and begin?
Sure. I suppose I wish even more now that Willis were here, so that there'd be two of us to try to take this on. But yes, Heather, thank you for your question. I think in some ways I'd repeat the kind of answer that I gave to Larry, in that I think perhaps some of the disagreement concerns scale. So the mandate for the flourishing of life, here. But what do you do in the case of invasive species? Does a mandate for the flourishing of life tell you to extirpate those invasive species for the sake of the native species that are being outcompeted? Well, extirpating species, that doesn't facilitate their flourishing, but obviously you're extirpating those species for the sake of the species who are being displaced. Yesterday, in response to Mark's talk about the dove and one reading of the Markan passages seeing God not as a dove, but embodied in the Holy Spirit in the dove, elicited the question of, well, what are we to think about the hawk in relationship to the dove? And so environmental ethical questions are very rarely, I think, questions of affirming value and mitigating disvalue simpliciter. Affirming value is very often implicated in increasing other disvalues, mitigating some disvalues, enhance some values, but the trade-offs are just ineluctable because of the systemic character of ecological systems. And so, yes, at the cosmological level, I think part of what ethics does is to say we need to do something beyond a kind of myopic anthropocentrism. But most of us, I think, who are involved in environmental ethics would nonetheless say that we want to affirm some kind of anthropocentrism. It's not as though we think of the human organism as on a par with every other organism. And it's in those more discriminating judgments that a lot of the ethical challenges of interacting with the environment emerge. And it's there that I'm suggesting that more determinate normative principles will be needed. And then simply I would say, to Barbara's comment, absolutely. And I think those of us like myself who work from a Christian perspective in environmental ethics want to see the new story as being anticipated and importantly corroborated by some very old stories. As I mentioned, one of, to me, the great insights of the religion and ecology movement is to say we need to think about particular sciences and specific faith traditions. So if you look at the 10-volume series, for example, Christianity and ecology, very different branches of Christianity are included in that volume because of the realization that Christianity is not monolithic on these questions. There is no Christian environmental ethic descriptively, and I'd furthermore say normatively, there is not a single Christian environmental ethic. The polyphony of the Scripture attests to the fact that Christianity is greater than any kind of denominational, institutional, or intellectual expression. So polyphony is endemic to it, and consequently, there are rich resources in the Scriptures with respect to cosmology.
Mary Ellen, very briefly,
very
then
short.
we'll go on
I want
to
to respond to the Earth Charter one. I wish I was representing Willis because he's so brilliant, along with Fred. But the Earth Charter does a little bit of what we're talking about here, namely, it's a context. So as I was part of the drafting committee, the preamble did exactly the sense of context. And we, in the subcommittee, put forward, we are part of a vast evolving universe. Earth is alive with a myriad community of life. It was the cosmology and the ecology that we were using as a context and then integrating the integrity of ecosystems, social economic justice, democracy, nonviolence, and peace. So it's a context that does need to be worked out more specifically. Larry, over to you.
Well, no, I was glad that you picked up on the Earth Charter because I think it is an example of a pretty determinate ethic that is congruent with the cosmology that we're talking about. Just a word on anthropocentrism. In a very important sense, it's inevitable. That is to say, we're creatures of symbolic consciousness, and anything we say about the rest of nature is going to come through our capacity. So there isn't any way that the human mind is not the participant, and that means with its limitations and with its capacity to skew everything. So there isn't any way of getting outside ourselves to view, even talk about what or who nature is and what its character is. So there's an inevitable anthropocentrism in that sense. But then there are multiple possibilities of what kind of way in which we understand ourselves. And what I was trying to say from Marilyn Robinson is that if we understand being and not just human beings as sacred, the social justice traditions have understood human beings as sacred, but not creation as sacred, then you get a different response, moral and ethical response, even with this inevitable anthropocentrism. I will say to Fred that, are you finished, John? Okay. Or am I finished?
We're just going to need to wrap up pretty quickly here.
Yeah, wrapping up. I think it's maybe helpful to say, because we're not the measure of all things, but we are the measurer of all things in the Anthropocene, in the sense of this. It gets filtered through us. And probably important to say that nature is always a teacher, but it's not always a teacher of morality. So that puts that burden also on one of these species with this kind of indeterminate power. And finally, I will say that on urgency, I always appreciated Dorothea Zola at Union when she would talk about revolutionary patience, the urgency of revolution. But this is a long slog, so it requires revolutionary patience as well. And Willis's position, I find myself very much aligned with. He talks about it as one of prophetic pragmatism. The pragmatism isn't enough because you accept too many of the systems and relationships. The prophetic comes in with the cosmology, and in the end of the future of ethics, he returns to cosmology, and he brings back what he called a temptation earlier on.
So I invite you to continue this conversation over coffee and come back at 11:30 for Earth Jurisprudence, and thank our wonderful speakers.
Great job, you guys.
Our principle is obviously we cannot make you rush, but in reality, please move with more than your customary speed.
Okay,